He was seconds away from drinking the coffee that powered his billion-dollar mornings. Then, his 8-year-old foster daughter whispered 4 words that changed everything. Daniel Ashcroft sat behind the wide glass desk that looked out over the city skyline, his morning coffee steaming gently in a porcelain cup at his elbow. He liked his mornings quiet, the hum of servers in the building below, providing a rhythm steadier than music, the glow of his laptop casting silver against the walls. At 32, he had built an empire out of code and timing, and people now called him a genius, though to him it had always felt like long nights and stubbornness. He reached for the cup without thinking, the taste of roasted beans, something he relied on to start his day, when a soft sound at the doorway made him pause. Maya Alvarez stood there, 8 years old, her shoes too big, her frame small, inside a sweater she had chosen because it let her disappear into corners. She had been with him only 3 months, brought by social workers who spoke in efficient tones about stability and opportunity, and he had agreed because he thought he could provide both. She rarely spoke, though he noticed her eyes, dark and sharp, always watching, measuring, recording. Now she took a step forward, her fingers brushing the doorframe as if asking permission to enter. Daniel gave her a small smile, distracted but genuine. "Morning, kiddo," he said, reaching again for the coffee. She crossed the floor quickly, her sneakers barely making a sound on the polished wood, and before he could lift the cup to his lips, she tugged at his sleeve. The movement startled him, not because of its force, but because she so rarely touched him at all. She leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear, and whispered 4 words that froze him in place. "It's in your coffee." The mug stopped an inch from his mouth. For a moment, he thought he had misheard, but the urgency in her face told him otherwise. He set the cup down slowly, carefully, as though it might explode if handled too quickly. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Maya pointed toward the cup, her small hand trembling just enough to betray her fear. "I saw her," she said, barely louder than the hum of the air system. "She put something inside." His heart kicked hard against his ribs. He wanted to dismiss it as childish imagination, but Maya's eyes held none of the flighty look of invention. They were steady, ancient almost, the eyes of a child who had learned to notice things to survive. He swallowed hard, his throat dry despite the untouched coffee. "Who?" he asked, forcing the word out. She glanced toward the security camera dome above the bar cart, then back to him. "Your fiancé," she whispered, and the way she said it carried no malice, only fact. Daniel stared at the steaming cup, the room around him suddenly colder, the trust he thought he lived in already beginning to fracture. Daniel's hand shook as the cup hovered inches from his mouth, the heat rising in faint curls of steam that suddenly felt dangerous rather than comforting. The words echoed inside his head with a weight he could not push aside. And for a moment all the noise of the city beyond the glass walls seemed to disappear, leaving only silence and the pounding of his own heartbeat. He set the cup back on the saucer slowly, carefully, as if any sudden move might reveal some hidden truth he was not ready to face. His eyes found Maya's, and what he saw there made his stomach tighten, because she was not joking, she was not playing, she was not even scared in the way a child might be if she had invented a story too big for herself. She was steady, calm, her gaze fixed on him with the seriousness of someone who had seen too much already in her short life. Daniel swallowed hard, searching for words, but none came. All he could think about was the fact that a child, his foster daughter, had just warned him about poison in something he was about to drink, and he could not remember the last time she had spoken to him in such a direct way. She usually stayed quiet, keeping to herself, drawing in her notebook or watching the world as if waiting for something to go wrong. He had once thought it was shyness, but now he wondered if it was something else, something harder, the habit of a girl who had learned that silence was safer than speech. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead, the chill of suspicion beginning to spread through him. "Maya," he said softly, his voice more fragile than he intended. "Are you sure?" She nodded without hesitation, her hands twisting in the hem of her sweater. He noticed how small her fingers looked, how tightly she held on, as though gripping fabric could keep her steady in the storm she had just created. His mind reeled with questions, doubts, and fears. He thought about his fiancée, about the gentle smile she wore when she handed him coffee, about the way she laughed when they planned their future, about the ring she still proudly displayed to their friends. It seemed impossible to connect that image with the accusation standing in front of him. Yet the truth in Maya's eyes gave him no room to dismiss it. The seconds stretched until they felt like minutes, until the hum of the servers and the faint ticking of his watch pressed against his skull. He realized then that he was trembling, his carefully built world suddenly fragile, every corner of the office holding shadows where betrayal might hide. He looked at Maya again, at the certainty in her young face, and he knew he could no longer pretend. Whatever this was, however painful the answer, he had to find out. Daniel followed the line of Maya's finger as she pointed to the glossy dome of the security camera above the barista bar, its dark glass reflecting the morning light like an unblinking eye. For years he had trusted those cameras to keep him safe, part of the sophisticated system he himself had designed. Yet now he realized that technology could only capture what people bothered to see, and it had taken an 8-year-old child to notice what he had ignored. His breath caught as Maya shifted her weight nervously, her voice low but steady, explaining that she had seen someone near the cups when he was not looking. She did not embellish. She did not falter. She simply spoke the way children speak when they know truth matters more than anything else. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows pressing into the polished wood of his desk, his mind already moving through possibilities and implications. If what she said was true, then someone close to him had dared to tamper with something as simple and intimate as his coffee, something he consumed daily, without question. He felt his stomach knot at the thought, realizing that the act was not just an attempt to harm, but a violation of trust so deep it made his skin crawl. He wanted to demand details, to press her for every moment, every glance, but he stopped himself when he saw how tightly she held her sweater, the fabric bunched in her fists. She had already carried this burden alone, and now she was offering it to him like a fragile gift. "Show me," he whispered, and she nodded, moving toward the small control panel near the wall. He had taught her once, casually, how to navigate the feeds, thinking it might distract her on restless nights, never imagining she would use that skill to protect him. Her small hands moved with certainty across the screen, selecting the correct date and time, her brow furrowed in concentration. Daniel watched in silence, his chest heavy with both dread and awe. The footage began to play, the familiar office space unfolding in grainy clarity. At first there was nothing unusual, just staff moving efficiently, setting mugs on the counter, preparing for his morning routine. Then the frame shifted, and his breath caught. A figure leaned over the cups, subtle in movement, quick in execution. The tampering was small, barely noticeable unless one was looking for it, but Maya had been looking, and now so was he. His pulse hammered as he recognized the profile, the graceful tilt of a head he knew too well, the hand that lingered a moment too long near the rim of his favorite mug. He froze, his throat tight, as the truth settled into place like a stone dropped into deep water. It was no stranger, no faceless intruder. It was someone he trusted, someone he loved. He looked at Maya, her dark eyes wide and certain, and he knew she had just changed everything. Daniel's hand hovered over the keyboard, his fingers unsteady as he pulled up the full security archive, the soft glow of the screen spilling across his face. Maya stood beside him, small and silent, her presence steady in a way that felt older than her years. The footage loaded slowly, each second stretching into an eternity, and he could hear the faint hum of the servers behind the wall, like the ticking of a clock. He forced himself to breathe evenly, though every muscle in his body was taut with dread. With a click, the playback began. The familiar setting of his office kitchen filling the monitor, staff moving in and out, cups stacked neatly, the morning routine captured in flat gray tones. At first, there was nothing unusual, just people doing their jobs. Unaware, they were now witnesses to something far darker. Daniel leaned closer, eyes narrowing as the timestamp flickered, and then it happened. Lila Bennett entered the frame, her movements casual, her beauty undimmed even by the poor resolution of the feed. She greeted one of the assistants with a smile, her lips moving in what looked like easy conversation, her body language warm and familiar. To anyone else it would have seemed ordinary, harmless even, but Daniel felt his pulse hammering as he noticed the way her right hand slipped into her handbag, emerging with something small and gleaming. The camera caught it clearly enough, a vial no bigger than her thumb, the liquid inside catching a glint of light as she shifted. She moved smoothly, as if she had rehearsed, unscrewing the cap while pretending to adjust the cups on the counter. In one swift motion, she tilted the vial, its contents spilling into his mug, then replaced the container in her bag without breaking stride. She laughed at something the assistant said, her smile radiant, her demeanor flawless, as though nothing at all had happened. Daniel felt the world tilt beneath him. His fiancée, the woman he had been ready to marry, had just poisoned his coffee while flashing the same smile she used to light up his evenings. He replayed the moment twice, 3 times, unwilling to trust his own eyes. But the truth did not change. Each time he saw the liquid fall, saw her mask of sweetness cover deliberate betrayal, his chest ached, not only from shock, but from the sharp cut of disbelief giving way to certainty. Beside him, Maya said nothing, only watched with the stillness of a child too used to seeing adults reveal the worst of themselves. Daniel turned his head toward her, and the weight of gratitude pressed against his ribs. Without her whisper, he would have drunk that coffee, trusting blindly, never realizing the danger resting in his own hand. He looked back at the screen, at Lila's glowing smile frozen on pause, and for the first time, he understood how thin the line was between love and destruction. Daniel sat frozen, his eyes locked on the screen where the paused image of Lila's radiant smile seemed to mock him, her hand resting lightly on the mug that could have carried his death. Shock collided with disbelief in his chest, leaving him dizzy, as if the room itself had tilted under his feet. He wanted to deny what he had seen, to blame the distortion of the grainy footage or the tricks of poor lighting, but there was no escaping the truth. Every frame of the recording as sharp as a blade. The woman he planned to marry, the one who had whispered promises in the dark and walked with him through crowded rooms as though they were already a unit, was the same woman who had slid poison into his morning ritual. His mind reeled, memories shattering and rearranging themselves with brutal clarity. He thought of the dinners where she had lifted her glass toward him with playful challenge, the afternoons she had stopped by his office with coffee in hand, her timing always perfect, her charm irresistible. He remembered the night he had shown her the prototype, his life's work encrypted within layers of security only he understood, and the way her eyes had glistened with admiration. Now those same moments twisted into a script written by deceit, every smile rehearsed, every gesture calculated, every kiss hiding something sharper beneath. Maya stood at his side, her small shoulders tight, watching him more than the footage, waiting for the moment when he would see what she had already accepted. He could feel her steady gaze, a child's truth cutting through the fog of his disbelief, and it hurt him more than the betrayal itself, to realize she had trusted him enough to speak when he might not have believed her. He lowered his head into his hands, his breath coming ragged, the polished surface of the desk cool under his elbows. Images of the future he had once imagined with Lila rose like smoke and dissolved. He had been ready to build a life with her, to share not only his home but his empire, convinced she wanted him, and not just the wealth that surrounded him. He thought of the ring resting in its velvet box, the proposal he had planned for the end of the quarter when his product launch would secure their future. The cruelest part was that she had known all of this, had accepted his love while planning to destroy him. and that knowledge settled like ice in his chest. When he finally lifted his head, he did not look at the screen again. He looked at Maya, who had said nothing, who simply waited. In her silence he found something stronger than his grief. The reminder that he was not as alone as betrayal wanted him to believe. His hand trembled as he reached for hers, the smallness of her fingers grounding him, the truth undeniable. Love had nearly blinded him, but in a split second, trust had shifted, and everything had changed forever. Daniel kept staring at the paused frame on the monitor, but his focus slipped as the silence of the room pressed heavy around him. Beside him, Maya shifted, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater, her dark eyes watchful. She looked as if she was waiting for him to break, waiting for him to either ignore her words or lash out, because that was what adults usually did when children told them things they did not want to hear. Daniel turned toward her slowly, searching for something steady to hold on to, and found it in her quiet gaze. She cleared her throat softly, the sound barely louder than the hum of the machines. "I watch a lot," she said, her voice almost apologetic, as if she was confessing to a crime. "In the other houses, before here, I had to. People said one thing but did another. So I learned if I wanted to stay safe, I had to notice little things, like when someone's voice got sharp before they got mean, or when they hid bottles under the sink, or when they said they'd come back and didn't." Her words carried no anger, only matter-of-fact acceptance, the kind of wisdom no 8-year-old should carry. Daniel felt his chest tighten, shame cutting through his shock, because he realized he had never asked her about those places. He had assumed a new room, new clothes, new schools would wipe away what came before, but here she stood proving that her past had sharpened her into someone who noticed what others missed. She rubbed her palms against her knees as she went on. "When Lila came here, I watched her too. She smiled at you a lot, but when you weren't looking, her face changed. She would look at your things, not at you, like she was measuring what she could take. I thought maybe I was wrong, but then I saw her near your cup, and I knew I couldn't stay quiet." Daniel let the words sink in, each one heavy with truth he had ignored. She glanced up at him quickly, then back down, her voice growing smaller. "Adults don't usually believe kids. They say we imagine things or make up stories. I almost didn't tell you, because I thought you'd think I was jealous or trying to cause trouble. But if I didn't say anything, and something happened to you, then it would be my fault too." He shook his head quickly, leaning forward so she would see his sincerity. "Maya, none of this is your fault. You saved me. Do you understand that? You noticed what I didn't, and you spoke when it mattered most. I believe you." Her lips pressed together as if to hold back a smile, but her eyes softened, the guarded look easing for the first time since she entered his life. In that moment, Daniel realized she was not a quiet child by nature, she was a quiet child by necessity. And for once her voice had been heard. Daniel sat at his desk, long after Maya's words had faded into silence. The screen, still showing the frozen image of Lila smiling, as if nothing in the world could be wrong. His hands hovered over the keyboard, his breath shallow, his mind a storm that refused to settle. He had built his empire on logic and evidence, on knowing how to see what others overlooked. Yet it had taken the warning of a child to pierce the illusion he had wrapped around his fiancée. He reached for his phone at last, his thumb trembling as he scrolled to a number he trusted more than any other. Evelyn Cho answered on the second ring, her voice clipped and professional even at this early hour. "Evelyn, it's Daniel," he said, his voice rough. "I need you at the house now. Bring the secure laptop, no one else." There was no hesitation on her end, only the quick intake of breath that told him she already suspected the reason. When Evelyn arrived 40 minutes later, the quiet strength she carried into every room seemed to push back the shadows. Tall, precise in every movement, with dark hair pulled into a sleek knot, she had served as his head of security since the early days when his company had been 3 people in a rented office. She had guarded not only his data but his life, and she had never once asked for more than his trust. Now she studied him with sharp eyes as he led her into the office, Maya following silently at their heels. He said nothing at first, only cued the footage again and pressed play. Evelyn stood with her arms crossed, her face impassive. But when the moment came and Lila's hand tipped the vial into his cup, her jaw tightened. She did not look at Daniel immediately. Instead, she rewound the video, played it again, and leaned closer, confirming what both of them already knew. "I had doubts," she said finally, her voice low and steady. "Too many coincidences. Too many questions she asked that didn't belong. But I didn't bring it to you because I had no proof. Now we have it." Daniel pressed his palms against the desk, his body heavy with both relief and despair. Proof was what he had demanded of himself, what he had refused to see without it. Now proof lay undeniable in the grainy video, and with it came the crushing weight of betrayal. Maya sat quietly in the corner, watching the two adults, her small face calm, but her eyes bright with the knowledge that she had been right. Evelyn glanced at her and gave a small nod of respect, as if recognizing a fellow observer. "We move carefully," Evelyn continued. "If she's done this once, she'll do it again. And if she's working with someone, we need to know who. But make no mistake, Daniel, this is no misunderstanding. She is not who you thought she was." Daniel met her gaze, the last traces of denial finally breaking. Suspicion had hardened into proof, and with it, the first steps of war. Evelyn worked in silence, her fingers gliding over the secure laptop as the office filled with the faint hum of machines. Daniel stood behind her, arms folded tight across his chest, his gaze fixed on the scrolling data that began to peel back the surface of Lila's carefully crafted world. Maya sat curled in a chair by the window, her legs tucked beneath her, her eyes darting between the adults as if memorizing every detail. The tension in the room was sharp enough to cut, yet Evelyn moved with the precision of someone who had walked this path many times before. She bypassed firewalls and encryption layers with ease, her face illuminated by the glow of code and account logs. "Here," she murmured at last, tilting the screen so Daniel could see. His stomach twisted as rows of numbers appeared, each one proof of something he wished were not true. 3 separate accounts, none tied to Lila by name, yet each connected to shell companies that fed back to Apex Systems, one of his fiercest competitors. The dates of the deposits matched perfectly with key milestones of his projects, each payment a silent reward for betrayal. Daniel's throat tightened as Evelyn pulled up phone records next, her eyes narrowing as she filtered through calls placed at odd hours. "She's careful," Evelyn said quietly. "Always late at night, always routed through secondary numbers, but not careful enough." The logs showed repeated contact with a man inside Apex, someone Daniel recognized instantly as their head of research. The realization hit him like a blow because it meant his own secrets, the algorithms he had poured years into building, had likely been leaking through the person he thought he would share his life with. Maya leaned forward, her small voice breaking the silence. "That's why she always went outside after dinner," she said, her tone matter of fact. "She said she needed fresh air, but she always took her phone. She never looked at the stars, she only talked into it." Evelyn gave her another sharp nod, recognition flickering in her eyes. Even a child's quiet observations had filled in the gaps of what the records now confirmed. Daniel pressed his hands against the desk, the polished surface cool beneath his palms as he tried to steady himself. Each revelation tore another piece from the image of Lila he had carried, each transfer, each call, each secret account building a portrait not of love, but of calculation. He remembered her laughter, her touch, the way she had said she believed in him, and all of it crumbled under the weight of evidence. Evelyn's voice pulled him back from the spiral. "This isn't just betrayal," she said firmly. "It's strategy. She's been playing a role, keeping you close while feeding your competitor exactly what they needed. She's living a double life, and she's very good at it." Daniel looked at Maya, who was watching him with steady eyes, And then back at the frozen image of Lila on the screen. The woman he had planned to marry no longer existed, replaced by someone he barely recognized, someone who had built her life on lies. The small glass vial sat in the evidence bag on Daniel's desk, its clear liquid catching the light like something harmless. Yet the lab report beside it told a story that made his stomach turn. Evelyn had driven it to a trusted contact at the forensic lab, a man who owed her favors from years back, and now the results lay printed in black and white. The substance was identified as a slow-acting toxin, one designed not to kill outright, but to wear down the body over time, damaging the nervous system in subtle increments until collapse was inevitable. Daniel read the words twice, then a third time, though their meaning did not change. He realized with horror that every sip he had taken over the past month might have been part of a calculated countdown. He dropped into his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. His hands pressed against his temples as if pressure alone could block out the reality. Maya hovered at the edge of the desk, her small fingers resting on the wood, her voice careful. "It was never just one cup," she said, and though she had not seen the report, she seemed to understand. "She kept giving it to you, every morning. Every time you were tired, she said coffee would help." Her tone held no drama, only the quiet clarity of a child who had already pieced together more than most adults dared. Daniel thought back over the past weeks, the headaches he had blamed on long hours, the tremors he had dismissed as stress, the dizzy spells he had laughed off when Lila had brushed his shoulder with concern. He felt his skin crawl as the pattern became clear. She had not needed to rush, because patience was her weapon. By the time of his product launch, when every eye in the industry would be on him, his body would have betrayed him in front of the world, leaving his company vulnerable and his reputation in ruins. The brilliance of the plan was cruel, precise, and almost flawless, and he might never have seen it if not for the whisper of an 8-year-old. Evelyn leaned against the desk, her face set in grim lines. "This toxin is rare," she said. "Not something you buy off a shelf. It comes from labs that specialize in industrial sabotage. That means she has connections, serious ones, and someone funded this." She wasn't acting alone. Her words carried no comfort, only the certainty of a soldier who had seen too many battles. Daniel forced himself to look at the vial again, to let the truth settle into his bones rather than push it away. Betrayal was no longer an abstract suspicion. It was chemical, measured, and designed to dismantle him piece by piece. He turned to Maya, who met his gaze with unwavering steadiness, and in her eyes he found the anchor he needed. What had been meant to destroy him had instead given him clarity, and clarity meant he still had time to fight back. The dining room glowed with the soft light of chandeliers, the table set with silver cutlery and crystal glasses, the kind of arrangement that suggested celebration rather than suspicion. Daniel sat at the head, his expression composed, his movements steady, though beneath the surface his mind ran like a machine, calculating every possible outcome. Across from him, Lila Bennett smiled, her green eyes shimmering as she poured wine into his glass, the picture of a fiancée devoted to her partner. Her dress caught the light with each motion, her laughter soft and timed perfectly, as if nothing in the world could disturb the scene. To anyone else it would have looked like a couple in love, but Daniel knew the truth, and the truth burned with every word unspoken. Maya sat at the far end of the table, small and quiet, her plate barely touched. She held her fork as if it were an anchor, her eyes moving between the adults, with a stillness that came from experience no child should carry. She watched Lila closely, the way her hand lingered near Daniel's glass a moment longer than necessary, the way she tilted her head to disguise the quick flick of her eyes toward the coffee pot waiting on the sideboard. Maya said nothing, because she knew her words had already done their work. Now she simply observed, storing details like arrows for later. Daniel lifted his glass but did not drink, swirling the wine with a casual grace that belied the storm within. "You've been busy lately," he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "Late nights, Early mornings. I hardly see you anymore. Lila gave a delicate laugh, leaning closer as if confiding something tender. All for you, darling, she said, her tone rich with affection. I want everything to be perfect for the launch. You've worked so hard, and you deserve nothing less. The words slid across the table like silk, but Daniel caught the edge beneath them, the rehearsed rhythm of a performance. He thought of the bank transfers Evelyn had uncovered, the phone calls at midnight, the footage of the vial tilted over his coffee, and he felt a bitter taste rise in his throat, even without drinking. He glanced toward Maya, and for the briefest moment their eyes met, her gaze steady, reminding him why he was here, why the mask had to hold a little longer. Dinner unfolded with deliberate slowness, each course carried in by staff who sensed nothing unusual, each exchange of words a careful dance between truth and deception. Lila leaned across the table more than once, her smile wide, her touch lingering on his wrist, her devotion painted in broad strokes for anyone watching. Yet Daniel noticed the subtle shifts, the way she checked her phone when she thought no one noticed, the quick calculation flickering behind her smile. When dessert was placed before them, Daniel leaned back, his voice smooth. I couldn't have come this far without you, he said. Lila's eyes softened on cue, her hand brushing his, but across the table, Maya's silence spoke louder than any toast. She knew, and Daniel knew, and soon the world would too. The glass of wine sat untouched in front of Daniel, its ruby surface reflecting the warm light of the chandelier above, a still pool of temptation waiting for his hand. Lila leaned closer, her smile flawless, her words wrapped in sweetness, yet her eyes flickered with something sharper when she thought no one was watching. Conversation flowed easily from her lips, stories about the charity gala next week, comments about the staff, questions about his schedule, each one delivered with the ease of someone who had practiced until the lines became second nature. Daniel nodded, answering with calm precision, but his thoughts were elsewhere, measuring her every gesture, timing the rhythm of her moves. Across the table, Maya sat quietly, her fork resting untouched beside her plate. She had learned long ago that silence let her see more than speech ever could, and tonight she saw what Daniel's heart tried to ignore. The faintest curve of Lila's lips appeared when she thought no one was paying attention, a smile too small for celebration, yet too large to be accidental. Maya's eyes followed the subtle shift of Lila's hand as it moved toward Daniel's glass, her fingers brushing the stem with casual familiarity. It was a motion so ordinary it might have gone unnoticed, but Maya had been watching for weeks, and she knew when something was off. Daniel's pulse quickened, but he kept his face steady, letting his hand fall casually to his phone beneath the tablecloth. The weight of the moment pressed on him, each second longer than the last, until his thumb typed the words he had been holding back. Move now. He pressed send, the message disappearing into the silence of encrypted channels, reaching Evelyn where she waited beyond the gates. He lifted his eyes back to Lila, who was laughing softly at something she had said, her fingers still near his glass, her attention returning with theatrical affection. Maya caught his gaze then, her dark eyes steady, the kind of look that carried no words but spoke of urgency and trust. Daniel felt the connection pass between them like a spark, unspoken but undeniable, a reminder that this child had already saved him once and was saving him again with her watchfulness. He leaned back slightly, letting the glass remain on the table untouched, letting Lila's hand retreat as though she had never moved it at all. The air in the room thickened, each breath heavy with the knowledge of what was about to unfold. Lila continued her performance, her voice sweet, her movements graceful, but the smallest crack had appeared in the mask, visible only to those who knew where to look. Maya saw it, Daniel felt it, and Evelyn was already on her way. In that slip, that tiny moment of overconfidence, the trap had begun to close. The dining room glowed with polished elegance, every glass and plate aligned with precision, the kind of setting that suggested love and comfort rather than danger. Daniel sat steady in his chair, his expression calm, though his chest felt like it carried a storm. He let Lila speak freely, her words tumbling out in a stream of devotion, her laughter wrapping around the room like silk, but his mind was already elsewhere, thinking of the cameras hidden in the corners of the ceiling, thinking of the eyes that were watching from just beyond the wall. Maya sat small and quiet at the edge of the table, her fork idle on her plate, her gaze sharp, as if she already knew what was about to happen. On the sideboard sat the coffee service, a silver tray glimmering under the light, cups neatly arranged, steam rising from the pot in slow curls. Daniel knew the moment was close, and he kept his voice easy, asking questions that required her to stand, inviting her to pour, drawing her into the familiar role she had played so many times before. Lila moved gracefully, her dress catching light with each step, her figure framed by the glow of chandeliers, and for a brief instant, Daniel felt the cruel echo of how much he had once loved her. Then he saw her hand slip into the handbag resting against the chair, saw the quick flicker of her eyes to make sure he was watching her face rather than her fingers. The cameras captured everything. Lenses no bigger than the head of a pin, recording each deliberate motion. She produced the vial again, small and gleaming, a gesture so practiced it looked almost elegant. She uncapped it in one fluid motion, her other hand steady on the handle of his cup, and tipped the clear liquid inside. It mixed silently with the dark surface, invisible to anyone who might drink without suspicion, the danger hiding behind warmth and routine. Her smile never faltered, her laugh still sweet, her body language perfect. Yet the truth was now frozen in digital proof. Maya's eyes widened slightly, the only sign she gave that she had seen it all. Daniel forced himself not to react, keeping his face composed, his hands folded loosely on the table. He imagined Evelyn in the next room, her team crouched with headphones and monitors, every angle feeding into their screens. He could almost hear her voice in his head, calm and professional, telling him to stay steady, to let the evidence speak. Lila returned to the table with the cup, setting it in front of him with a smile that looked radiant to anyone who did not know better. "For you," she said softly, her voice carrying a melody he had once believed in. Daniel gave her a small nod, his hand hovering above the cup but never touching. The trap was set, the proof undeniable, and in the silence that followed he felt the weight of betrayal finally shifting. Beyond the door, Evelyn waited, and soon the mask would shatter. The moment the cup touched the table, the door to the dining room swung open, and the quiet elegance of the evening shattered under the rush of footsteps. Men and women in dark jackets poured in, their voices firm but controlled, announcing themselves as federal agents, their badges catching the light of the chandeliers. The calm surface of the house was gone in an instant, replaced by the charged hum of authority moving with purpose. Daniel sat still, his hands folded, his face unreadable, while beside him Maya flinched at the sudden noise, yet kept her eyes fixed on Lila. Evelyn entered behind the agents, her expression composed, her voice steady as she directed them toward the evidence already catalogued by the hidden cameras. Lila froze for only a heartbeat before her mask cracked. Shock flashed across her face, quickly replaced by outrage, her voice rising sharp and shrill as she demanded to know what was happening. She reached for Daniel's arm, as if trying to pull him into her performance, her green eyes glistening with tears that might once have swayed him. "Tell them this is a mistake," she cried, her tone dripping with disbelief. "Tell them you know me, that I would never do something like this." But Daniel did not move, did not speak. He only watched as the evidence was lifted from the table, the vial sealed in a bag, the poisoned coffee marked and secured. The agents guided her away from the table, but she resisted, her voice cracking as anger replaced fear. She hurled accusations across the room, claiming she was framed, insisting that Daniel had orchestrated everything to ruin her, screaming that Maya was lying, that the child was nothing but a manipulative orphan, planting stories in his head. Her words grew wilder, more frantic, until even she seemed to realize They rang hollow against the calm recitation of facts, read aloud by the agents. The footage played on a portable monitor, each frame showing her hand, her vial, her practiced smile, her crime caught with undeniable clarity. The lab results were displayed alongside, listing the toxin in precise medical terms, every line another nail sealing her fate. Lila's shoulders sagged when she saw it all arrayed together, the last shreds of her mask falling away. The woman who had once played the part of a loving fiancée now stood exposed as a conspirator, her beauty reduced to a shell around cold calculation. Maya remained silent through it all, her small figure still in her chair, her eyes locked on Lila as if memorizing what betrayal looked like when truth stripped it bare. Daniel felt the weight of her steadiness, the quiet strength that had carried them both to this moment. As the agents clasped handcuffs around Lila's wrists and read her rights, the final act of her deception crumbled into nothing. The house grew quieter again, though the echo of her accusations lingered in the air. Proof had spoken louder than her lies, and the night had given them justice. The house was quiet after the chaos of the arrest, the dining table still set as if the evening had never unraveled, though the silence now carried a weight heavier than crystal or silver could bear. Daniel stood at the window with his phone in hand, the city lights stretching endless beyond the glass, his reflection pale and haunted in the pain. Evelyn sat nearby, reviewing files on her secure laptop, her posture rigid, her eyes narrowed as lines of data scrolled past. Maya curled on the sofa, small but unblinking, as if waiting for the next layer of truth to surface. Daniel thought the worst was behind them, but Evelyn's sharp intake of breath told him the storm had only shifted. She turned the laptop toward him, her voice level yet edged with steel. "It wasn't just Lila," she said. "Look at this." On the screen were financial ledgers, bank transfers, routed through shell companies, transactions carefully disguised yet unmistakable in their pattern. Daniel leaned closer, his stomach tightening as the names and numbers connected. Every trail led back to one person, a man he had trusted for nearly a decade, his chief financial officer, Victor Hale. Daniel felt as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. Victor had been with him since the beginning, when his company was nothing more than a rented office and an idea too fragile to believe in. They had built the empire together. Long nights fueled by takeout and ambition, laughter shared over the first contracts, relief when investors finally called. To imagine that man-engineering betrayal was almost beyond reach, yet the proof stared back in cold numbers. Payments from Apex Systems lined up with Victor's account activity, and the timing of each aligned perfectly with moments when Daniel's work had been most vulnerable. Evelyn's tone was grim. He was feeding her information, arranging meetings, keeping her funded. Lila was the hand, but Victor was the shadow pulling the strings. The weight of her words settled like stone in the room. Daniel pressed his palms against the desk, memories flashing of Victor's steady voice in boardrooms, his counsel during crises, the trust he had placed without hesitation. Now he saw those moments twisted into cover for sabotage, every piece of advice perhaps nudging him closer to collapse. Maya shifted on the sofa, her voice small but certain. "I saw him here once, when you weren't home. He was in your office with her." They whispered a lot, then laughed when they thought no one was around. Daniel turned sharply, his chest hollow. Even Maya, with her quiet eyes, had seen what he had chosen not to. The betrayal cut deeper because it came from both sides, from the woman he thought he loved and the friend he thought he could not live without. The encryption prototype, his life's work, was the prize. Victor had built the plan with patience, waiting until Daniel was weakened by poison and scandal, until the company could be stripped from him like flesh from bone. But now the light was on him, and shadows could not survive proof. The morning of the raid dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to press down on the city, as though the air itself carried secrets waiting to be broken open. Daniel sat in the back of an unmarked car with Evelyn beside him, her expression unreadable, her phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated the teams already moving into position. Maya sat between them, small and silent, her knees drawn up, her eyes fixed on the blur of buildings rushing past. She had insisted on coming, not because she wanted to see the confrontation, but because she wanted to be there when truth finally outweighed lies. Daniel had not argued, knowing she had earned her place in this story. When they arrived, the street was already sealed, agents in dark jackets moving with swift precision. The glass tower that bore Victor Hale's name at the top looked cold and impassive, but Daniel knew what waited inside. Years of trust twisted into betrayal, years of friendship reduced to contracts written in invisible ink. He stepped out of the car and felt the chill wind cut through his suit, grounding him in the reality that this was not a nightmare, but the unraveling of his life's work. Inside, the lobby echoed with shouts and the pounding of boots. Victor's staff huddled in corners, confusion and fear written across their faces as agents swept through offices, seizing computers, pulling cables, securing files. Daniel followed Evelyn through the chaos, his heart pounding as they reached the executive suite. The door to Victor's office stood open, drawers pulled wide, paper scattered like confetti across the floor. A cluster of agents worked quickly around the desk, sliding hard drives into evidence bags, photographing every corner. One of them called Evelyn over, handing her a laptop already open to a directory of files. She scanned quickly, her jaw tightening. "Contracts," she said, her voice flat. "Not with domestic firms. Overseas buyers. Multiple governments. They were preparing to auction your prototype to the highest bidder." Daniel felt the words land like a physical blow. It was not just about competition, not just about profit. It was about betrayal on a scale that threatened more than his company. His encryption system had been designed to protect financial institutions, hospitals, even government infrastructure. In the wrong hands, it could be twisted into a weapon, the very foundation of trust corrupted. He stared at the files, the logos of corporations and agencies he recognized, and the pit in his stomach deepened. Maya tugged at his sleeve, her voice steady. "That's why they needed to break you," she said. "Not just to steal your work, but to make sure no one listened to you when you tried to stop them." Her words carried more weight than her years, and Daniel realized she had understood the heart of it long before he had. Evelyn closed the laptop with finality, her eyes meeting his. "This conspiracy runs deeper than we imagined, but now we have the proof." Daniel nodded slowly, the sting of betrayal still raw, yet beneath it a sharper resolve began to burn. The courtroom was hushed, the kind of silence that seemed to press into every corner, broken only by the shuffle of papers and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table beside Evelyn, his suit immaculate, his posture rigid, but his gaze was fixed on the small figure walking toward the witness stand. Maya moved carefully, her shoes clicking against the polished floor, her hands folded in front of her as if she were holding her courage like something fragile. At only 8 years old, she looked impossibly small beneath the high ceilings. Yet there was a steadiness in her step that made the room lean forward. When the bailiff swore her in, her voice was soft but clear, the words spoken without hesitation. She settled into the chair, her legs too short to reach the floor, and looked directly at the prosecutor when the first question came. "Maya, can you tell us what you saw?" The courtroom held its breath. She nodded once, her dark eyes steady, and began to speak. She explained how she had watched from the hallway that morning, how she had seen Lila at the counter, her hand slipping something into Daniel's cup. She described the blinking light on the painting at night, the unfamiliar signals she had traced on her tablet, the times she had caught Lila whispering with Victor when Daniel was away. Her voice never wavered, though her small fingers twisted in her lap, and every sentence carried the weight of a truth she had carried alone for weeks. Victor's attorney tried to break her rhythm, pressing her with questions meant to confuse, but Maya only tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharp in a way that made her seem older. "No," she said simply when they asked if she might have imagined it. I know what I saw. The defense tried again, pointing to her age, to her background in foster care, implying she was prone to invention. But Maya did not flinch. Adults don't always believe kids, she answered, her voice quiet but ringing with certainty. But that doesn't make us wrong. The footage was played next, projected high above the courtroom, every grainy frame showing Lila's hand, the vial, the practiced smile. Gasps rippled through the gallery as the images aligned perfectly with Maya's account. The prosecutor guided her gently, asking if this was what she had seen, and she nodded firmly. The combination of her calm testimony and the visual proof left little room for doubt. Even the jurors, who had seemed skeptical earlier, now leaned forward, their faces shifting as the story solidified. Victor sat stone-faced at his table, but Daniel saw the flicker in his eyes, the first crack in the defense he had clung to. It was not Evelyn's analysis or the forensic reports that undid him, though those mattered. It was the quiet voice of a child who had simply told the truth. When Maya stepped down, the judge thanked her personally, a rare gesture that underscored the gravity of her words. Daniel exhaled slowly, knowing the turning point had come, delivered by the child who watched. Weeks passed before the storm truly settled. The headlines faded from front pages, the courtrooms emptied, and the noise of betrayal began to dim. Daniel moved through those days with a kind of deliberate steadiness, focusing not only on rebuilding his company, but on the smaller details of life at home, the details that mattered more than contracts or algorithms. Maya remained by his side through it all, her quiet presence a reminder of how everything had begun, with a whisper in his office and the courage to be believed. When the papers arrived from family court, he held them with a reverence he had never felt for any award or title, the ink declaring what had already become true in practice, that Maya Alvarez was no longer a foster child, waiting to be moved again, but his daughter, officially and forever. The adoption hearing had been short, the judge smiling kindly as Maya spoke her name with pride, her hand clutching Daniel's as if to make sure he would not vanish. Evelyn had been there too, her eyes shining despite her usual composure, and when the gavel came down, it felt like a door closing on shadows. They celebrated not with champagne or grand gestures, but with ice cream in the kitchen, Maya laughing as chocolate dripped down her chin, Daniel realizing he had never heard a sound more precious. Later that evening, he walked into his office and looked at the frame still hanging on the wall. It was a grainy image pulled from the security feed, Maya's small figure pointing at the camera above the barista bar, her arms stretched with determination, her face serious with the knowledge she carried. He had chosen to frame it not because it was flattering or beautiful, but because it was the moment that saved his life. Every time his eyes landed on it, he remembered the sip he never took, the poison he never swallowed, and the trust he almost ignored. Maya wandered into the office and saw him standing there. She tilted her head, her dark eyes thoughtful. "You kept it," she said softly. He nodded, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I'll always keep it. That picture reminds me of the moment you gave me the truth and the moment I finally listened." She smiled then, not the guarded smile she had worn in the beginning, but something brighter, freer, the smile of a child who finally belonged. Daniel knew the battles were not over, that rebuilding trust with investors and clients would take time, but he also knew the foundation of his life was stronger now than it had ever been. Wealth had given him security, power had given him influence, but Maya had given him something neither could buy, a reason to protect not just what he had built, but the family he now cherished. The certificate lay on his desk, the frame on the wall, two pieces of proof bound together by love and courage. The mansion felt different now, lighter somehow, as if walls once heavy with secrets had finally learned to breathe. Sunlight streamed through tall windows and no longer seemed cold against polished floors. Instead, it warmed the rooms in ways Daniel had not noticed before. For months, the house had been filled with suspicion, shadows stretching into corners where hidden devices hummed and betrayal lingered unseen. But now there was only silence, honest and calm. Daniel walked slowly through the hallways, his eyes catching on the new frames that lined the walls, a mixture of his own patents and Maya's drawings, inventions sketched beside flowers, equations balanced beside bright crayon suns. It felt less like a monument to achievement and more like a home, a place where history and hope could share the same space. Maya skipped beside him, a pencil smudge on her cheek from an afternoon spent bent over her sketchbook, her voice carrying stories about the robot she wanted to design for her science project. She spoke quickly, her hands moving in wide gestures, and Daniel listened with a focus that surprised him. Every detail treasured, every word another thread, weaving them closer together. He realized he had learned to hear her in ways he never heard anyone else. Her small voice, sharper and truer than the noise of boardrooms or the applause of investors. The coffee pot sat unused on the counter, gleaming in the light of the kitchen. Daniel poured himself tea instead. The ritual, small, but deliberate. He could never look at coffee the same way, not after the whisper that had saved him. Each time he thought about lifting a cup, he saw Maya standing in his office doorway, her tiny hand tugging his sleeve, her eyes carrying the truth adults had overlooked. That moment had marked him more than any deal, more than any award, because it was not just survival she had given him, it was family. Evenings were no longer filled with long hours in front of glowing screens. Now Daniel left his work when the clock struck 6, because Maya liked him to sit at the table while she did her homework, and Josephine told old stories about the house. Sometimes Evelyn joined them, her dry humor softening in the glow of laughter. They no longer looked like people bound only by crisis, but like a family, learning to share the peace they had fought for. At night, when the house settled into quiet, Daniel often stood by Maya's doorway, listening to the rhythm of her breathing as she slept beneath blankets chosen in her favorite color. The certificate of adoption hung on the wall, but he knew it was more than paper that bound them. It was trust earned in fire, truth spoken when silence would have been easier, love proven by the courage of a child who had refused to be ignored. The mansion was brighter, and so was he, because in the end Maya had given him something he never knew he needed, not just safety, but belonging. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us.